Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second in the webinar College 411 webinar series sponsored by Clio Consultants. Today, we're going to talk about finding your way as a first-gen college student. And so we've got a great panel with us today. Each of us will share their experiences and talk about strategies, for first-gen students. At the end, what we'd like to do is talk about how faculty and administrators, university staff can best support their own first-gen student population. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves. So I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist, Dr. Jose Martinez. Jose, do you mind introducing yourself to the group?
No, absolutely. My name is Jose Martinez. I am currently an instructor in the University Learning Frameworks course, which is the first year seminar at UTRGV. I've been doing it for about 3 years. I myself am a first generation college student, third generation migrant farm worker. My grandfather started working as a migrant farm worker as part of the Bracero program. And then my parents continued, and then I began working with my parents in the fields when I was 7 years old. So I got to work a very unique opportunity to work alongside my grandmother, my grandfather, paternal grandparents, my parents, my seven brothers. I don't have any sisters, and many extended family members. I'm originally from, I grew up in Donna. I was born in Mexico, and I have seen the power of what higher ed can do for first generation low income students like my family. All eight of us graduated from high school, graduated from college, and that has sort of guided my professional career as well. That knowing what a higher education can do for students. I've worked in higher ed for many years. I've worked in K-12 education, migrant education. My doctoral dissertation actually focuses on studying the college experiences of Latinx students with a focus on migrant farm workers and college transitions. And I'm very excited and passionate about helping students be successful no matter where they start in life. I think there's so much talent and sometimes untapped potential with our first generation college students. So I'm excited to be here tonight.
Awesome. Thank you, Jose. Camelia, would
Mhm.
you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Camelia Rubalcada. I am the Dean of Student Success at Hood College in Frederick, Maryland. I'm originally from Elsa, Texas, and when I was young, even though I really loved school when I was younger, I made some choices that led me down a different journey. And so I was a teenage mom at the age of 17. Many individuals didn't think I was going to make it very far in high school. I did have support from some people, but some people also thought that I was probably a lost cause because I was a teenage mother. So it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do as far as my career. I thought I knew in the beginning, but once I went back to school at an older age, I was able to now determine what it was that I wanted to do, and I wanted to be a voice for students. I struggled in the beginning with college, and I encountered some wonderful mentors that actually forced me to really think about what it is I wanted, and I wanted to be a voice for students, and that's why I'm in this position now. I too have worked at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, and I also worked at the University of Iowa, and it's always working with students that come from first generation and low income backgrounds as myself. And I think it's important for us to voice that and be proud of that. And it's part of our identity. So I'm glad to be here and see how I can support the students.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you to both of you for joining us. And for those of us that don't even know me, my name is Dr. Jose Saldivar. I am the owner of Clio Consultants, but I'm also a part-time faculty member at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, formerly the director of the Learning Framework program at UTRGV. And I, we can go anywhere in any direction, right? One thing that I've always been fascinated by is the definition of a first generation college student because you know I'm a first generation graduate. My parents both went to college, but then neither finished. My father dropped out after, I think, a semester. My mother was all but like a year away or something from graduating. And so, I was the first to graduate in the immediate family. And so that's always one, it's a term I think that for a lot of students, they try to sort of find themselves with this term, where do I stand, right? Um, and so I think to start for us, maybe what does it mean for you to be a first generation college student? And anyone can take this.
I think for me, I think for what I see it represents a different journey, breaking the generational cycles of my family, so that I can make a better future for my own family and also impact other individuals that find themselves in similar situations as I did when I was younger. I think it's also important to note that we don't know what that term really means, right? I didn't learn about that term until I actually started going to graduate school and hearing the term first generation college student. And a lot of the times we think that if our families went to Votech, that means they went to college, right? Because I remember my mom would go to Votech, I think in Harlingen. And so it's sharing that knowledge early on so that students are aware about what that is and so that they can be proud, a proud first gen, and know that they're making a difference. So I think that's what it means for me, is breaking the generational cycles, making a difference and making an impact so that other individuals have opportunities as well.
Thank you. Jose, how about you?
Yeah, yeah, similar to that. It's interesting because people talk about, to me, right, that a first generation college student. I tell them, well, I'm a kind of a first generation everything. I first generation. My parents didn't go to middle school, so every time we went anything beyond elementary school, then we were first gen. Middle school attendees, middle school graduates, high school attendees, and so on and so forth. To me, I agree with what Camelia is saying. I think it's breaking the cycle, but in many ways, it's also setting a trend, setting a path for those that are coming behind us. I know in my family, and I imagine in many of our, and in the families that would be considered first generation families, the older siblings are often tasked with setting the ejemplo, the example for the younger siblings. And so to me, it entails also setting the trend, setting an example, and I think looking back now, if you were to ask me, what it meant, when I started college, I may not have had a strong idea, but I believe now that uh, having set the example and sort of served as a mentor to my younger siblings has made a huge difference. If you look at our GPAs, so six of us graduated from the University of Michigan, me and five of my brothers, and our if you look at our GPAs, it's like a ladder, right? The older ones were like me, were at the bottom, and then my younger siblings all did better progressively, and then the youngest one to graduate had the highest GPA because we served as mentors to each other. So to be a first generation college student, it is certainly a lot more complex than people make it seem. But to me, the big thing is setting a trend for future generations in a way where my hope is that you're not first, that your children and even your extended family members will follow in your footsteps, as many of my cousins have with us.
Yeah, I thank you to both of you. I appreciate that. And, I love the way, right, it is a complex concept, but I love the way we unpacked it. And for each of us, the meaning behind it. I especially love the idea of breaking that sort of that generational, the cycle, um, because it is powerful in what education can do for a family and for individuals. You know, as we continue with this conversation, given your not only your personal experiences for both of you, but in the work that you do and in the work that you've done, right? You've served first gen students, both of you, coming in with an extensive amount of experience. So I think a good question is, what are some of the immediate challenges that you see that first generation students encounter when they get to a university or college setting?
Well, what I think I've seen, and I don't know if it's on them. I think part of it is also on us as educators. And one of the things that I mean, I've more recently I've tried to start the semester leading with student assets, right? And and so I spend my first week or two talking about and really highlighting everything that these students bring with them that's been provided to them by their families, whether the families, have a formal education or not. The families have given our students so much. And when we start unpacking it, they get emotional because like they say, you're right. And a student, I'll never forget this reflection. A student said, you know what? I've never been asked and I've never considered what I bring to the table to my education. Nobody's ever asked me. So when we talk about what is it that they face or struggle, I think uh, from my perspective, some of it is on us. We don't remind our students enough all the strengths and assets that they bring with them. That in many ways, in my perspective, makes them uh, stronger students than maybe somebody who's second generation. I'll talk briefly about one of the things that I remember growing up and going to the University of Michigan. Um, I didn't know a whole lot about college. I had nobody in my family that had gone. My brother was there, but he'd only been there a year. But I knew that I had to do, several things. And I think I learned that from being a farm worker. As a farm worker, I worked from the time I was 7 years old to the very day I went off to college. I picked strawberries in the morning, went home at noon, took a shower, and by 5 o'clock that same day, I was sitting in my dorm room in Adelswood Hall at the University of Michigan. And I was a first gen college student, and I realize now, I didn't realize this then, but I had friends of mine whose parents were state senators, attorneys, engineers, and they wouldn't go to class. They wouldn't, oftentimes when they went, they would fall asleep. Uh, and what I realize now is that having been a farm worker for that long, uh, I knew how to work hard. So some things that I did is I went to every single class. I think I missed 3 lectures in my 4.5 years at the University of Michigan. I knew I had to take notes, so I took notes diligently. And maybe it was my farm worker background, but I knew I had to produce something. So I submitted every. I don't remember not have ever having not submitted an assignment when I was in an undergrad. And I think that was part of and connected to what had been given to me by my family. So this is why I try to make these connections that our students, even though they might be seen as first gen and maybe uh, being at a disadvantage, I think we have to remind ourselves that our students have lived experiences that few others have and had to overcome some of these things and remind our students that they do come with all these strengths and assets and that they can put them to work for them at the university to be successful.
I want to make sure I want to allow Camelia to respond, and then I'm going to come back, Jose, because I have some questions for you in
Mhm.
terms of your response. But Camelia, how about you? What are some of the challenges that you see, first gen students having when they, get to the university?
You know, some of the challenges that I have seen, I think also connect with what Dr. Jose, I mean, sorry, with, I'm looking, I apologize. Anyway, so let me get back on topic. um, Connect with what he just said. And I say that because sometimes our strength can hinder us, right? So some of the things that I have seen from first generation students is, because we're taught to have this strong work ethic, we're taught to be the top, right? They come in with very high expectations, very high achieving students, and they sometimes think that the work that they produced in high school, the way that they studied, is going to be the same way that they're going to approach college, right? And they approach it in a way, like he had shared, that they're not going to class or they're not putting in the extra hours to study, and then they get their first C or D, and that affects them drastically emotionally and mentally, and creates anxiety. And they come in with not having the tools and the skills to really learn how to time manage, how to study, how to ask for help. Because I know that, like, for me, I'm taught, you go figure it out, and you got to get it done, right? You got to be responsible, and if you ask for help, it was a sign of weakness or a sign of failure. And so I've seen a lot of those challenges, that they sometimes lack the skills to navigate college. Even though they're responsible, they have good work ethic, sometimes that does not might not apply in the how they're going to approach college, right? They might not know how to apply it to the time management and study skills. And I think it is great to set high goals, but when you're setting these high goals and you're not balancing it, it's affecting your mental health. So those are other challenges that I have seen, that we have to unlearn some of the things that might have not been healthy when we were growing up, right? You're taught to always go to work, you don't miss a day, because that makes you look like an employee that, is not a good employee. And so students come in with those mindsets, depending also from cultural backgrounds, right? And if their parents, they have to make a difference because they're the first one in their families to go to college. So I think for me is having empathy for those students, and also checking your own privilege. Even though I might have had some similar experiences from the students I connect with, one of the things that I think for me was very impactful during my time at UTRGV, because I felt I could relate to a lot of the students. I'm always one that says, get out of the valley, go and explore, and then come back with this wealth of knowledge, right? To make a difference, make an impact, whether it's the valley or other communities, you want to go out there, right? And experience. And I remember I was working with this student, and he had been accepted to many Ivy League institutions. And I said, why did you not go to like Harvard or Stanford? And one thing I had never considered, and this was my privilege, I saw that, wow, I need to think about that when I'm working with certain demographic of students. He was like, I could not go because my parents were undocumented and would never be able to go see me achieve my degree. And that to me is important, because I want to show them the, that I have made it for our family. And I had never thought about things like that. So sometimes it's easy for us to give some advice to these first generation students and not know their entire story. So for me, it's understanding the challenges that they have, finding out more about their journey and their story, and help guiding them and helping them unlearn some of the things that they have been taught, and applying it in a way that's going to be balanced, right? So that they can achieve that high 4.0, so that they can, be the stellar employee and be the stellar student. But let's get there in a healthy, balanced way. And I feel like that is what I have encountered a lot, is that they come in here ready to hit the ground running, but are not necessarily aware of all the skills that come with being in a college setting. And even like if you're an undergrad, I started off my college journey as in a community college. And so when I transferred to the University of Iowa, I was like, I already graduated, I got this, I know how to study. I had to relearn how to study again because the University of Iowa was more rigorous. The same thing when I went to grad school, I was like, I'll be fine. I already have 2 degrees, I'll be okay. Oh no, I had to relearn. So I think it's understanding those things and not being afraid to ask for help. And I see that a lot from our students.
Okay. So thank you to both of you. There's a lot to unpack here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so and so here's what I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I'm going to go back to Jose, because Jose, you sort of approached it. You approached the question from what you have done based on your own experiences, to best support your students? Now, you said you take an assets-based approach and you help students recognize, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you help students recognize, right, that what they are bringing to the classroom um, oftentimes is an asset, but these are things that maybe they overlook. Um, or would you say these are things that, particularly in a school setting, maybe schools don't place a lot of value on, but it doesn't mean that these students shouldn't see the value in what it is that they bring to the school, and then how they can utilize those and leverage those values, those assets, to be successful as students. Am I correct in that?
Yes, exactly. I think that even at the university, schools, universities, and I'll share an example. I mean, I've been in meetings where people are talking about assets-based approaches, and the very first question they ask is, "What are our students lacking?" Right? And in fact, the question of what do the students bring is never even asked. And to me, it seems it seems like I don't understand it. I don't understand how we can say we're using an assets-based approach and then never ask the question intentionally and say, what do the students bring? And I do believe that if that's not done, the students don't see themselves and don't and if we don't ask them and to write about these and to reflect on everything that they bring with them, because once I've done that, the content is going to come, the all the everything that we do that we teach. But if our students don't if we don't begin with that, I feel like we're missing an opportunity to remind the students that they do have strengths and they need to leverage them. And the support they have from their families is critical, is important. I often ask students, who's your biggest motivator for being at the university and being successful? They point to family. Who's your bigger supporter? They point to family. And yet, higher education literature tells us that students have to separate from family and adopt the university as a new family in order to be successful. And I don't necessarily buy into that, because why would I separate my students from their biggest source of motivation and their biggest form of support? I had a student last semester that when we were talking about the issue of motivation, where's your motivation come from? Many of them said family, but a student came up to me after class and said, you know what? After we had that discussion, I actually took my family portrait from the living room and put it next to my desk where I studied, so that I would constantly be reminded of why I'm putting in these long hours. So I think it's making connections for students that are often not made, and it's trying to help them understand. And if we lead with that, I believe students step onto campus a little bit differently
Mhm.
when they come onto campus and connected to sense of belonging, and feeling like this is their university. I had a student today come in. Uh, they were waiting for the class. I was done. I was wrapping up, and the student said, "Is it okay if we wait in here while you?" I said, "This is your university. It's your everything in here is built for you." So, and I mention that often in my class.
You know, Jose, I'm gonna say something that, and hopefully, I think this will transition us to Camelia's reflections and thoughts. Um, I think what you're doing is incredibly valuable, and I agree. I think even in my own teaching, um, I like to start from that point of view of helping students recognize what it is that they're bringing to the classroom, to the university, and how to leverage those things. But now my question to both of you, or is what I'm a first gen student. I'm at the university, and and I don't think I'm being critical in saying this. I don't think most faculty look at students from an assets based lens. So me as a student, as a first gen student, if I'm in a class and my faculty member, my teachers, my instructors, professors don't take that approach, what advice, and this is for either both of you, what advice do you give me? Right? Because I think you're speaking from the position of, I'm a faculty member and I'm going to take an assets based approach to these students. But if I'm on the other end, if I'm the student and my faculty, my teachers aren't taking that approach, what do I do?
Jose, I have a question.
Mm.
So let me
Wait,
ask you
wait,
this.
wait. Which Jose?
You.
Okay,
I have
okay.
a question because you're very smart. You've always been very smart. Where people knew you were going to go far. You had people highlighting your assets when you were
Mhm,
younger, but you were in a predominantly Latino community. Okay. But you went to Stanford, which is
mhm,
very different. So you might have came into Stanford with higher GPAs than other students. You've earned your place there. Do you think that also plays a part? Because you and I grew up in the same place, and I
mhm,
know I had potential. I used to be in the same classes with you guys until, I started making different decisions.
mhm,
But if you and I were in the same class,
mhm,
your assets would be highlighted more than
mhm,
mine, even though
mhm,
I was a good worker or I had other strength, I was resilient. But
mhm,
GPA, all of those things were important, right?
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
do you think that because you went to a school where people like us were looked at, you got a scholarship to go here, you probably don't have assets to bring? Was
mhm.
that an experience you had at Stanford, or do you think that doesn't play a part in how you felt where much faculty, because faculty feel if you come in with a high GPA, you have an asset. If you come in with challenges, they don't know your story, but you might not have these assets and you actually do. So I was just curious to see.
Um, so when I went away, um, and I thought I was hot, whatever. And you're right, I was celebrated, and I always had support. And then I think when I got to Stanford, I, I went to Stanford very scared, because I knew I didn't know how to study, because I didn't have to study very hard at EdCal Chelsea. No offense to EdCal Chelsea. I didn't have to study very hard. And I got there and I overstudied. But one thing that I quickly realized, and I share this often, is, the whole imposter syndrome. I mean, everybody sounded smarter than me. Everybody was incredibly accomplished. Um, and so I had some very serious doubts about whether or not I belonged. And I remember, so reflecting on this now, I don't know. One, I went to professors and I was very open about, I need help. I'm coming from, this is where I'm coming from, this is who I am. And I'm trying my best and I'm reading everything and I'm doing everything you're asking me to do, but I don't want to speak up in class because I don't sound like anybody else. And I don't, and I sure, and to me, I don't sound as smart as anybody else there. Um, and the interesting thing is, uh, being around that environment, a lot of kids went to boarding schools. I, I wasn't going to know Shakespeare. I wasn't going to know a lot of the stuff that they knew. And I don't know where this came from. I started studying my hometown. So, like in a lot of classes, there was a lot of papers and projects. I started writing about oral histories. I started writing about the football team. I started writing about poverty in South Texas. And so, in my mind, and I don't know that it was a conscious decision, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I don't know Shakespeare, I don't know this, but you don't know Texas and you don't know the Valley, and I do. And that's where I can excel. And so I think the good thing was I had a lot of professors that encouraged that in me. And so maybe in class they didn't say openly like we're going to take an assets based approach and Jose, what do you bring? But I think in those one-on-one meetings they did that for me. Um, and and I honestly, Camelia, I don't know where that came from. Like even asking for help because a lot of us are reluctant to ask for help, right? Like you said, but I tell my students, I had a greater fear of failing and going home than asking for help. So I asked for help. Like right away, I lived in office hours and I asked for help. Um, and I struggled that first year, but I found myself. Um, yeah, thank you for asking that. I struggled that transition was tough for me. But I also like to Jose's point, I recognize that most faculty don't take that and don't even give that space for students to sort of explore what kinds of assets they can bring to a class. And so I think here collectively, how do we empower students to do that, right? How do we do that?
I think you gave us an example, being vulnerable, with our students and sharing our journey with our students so that they can feel comfortable in asking for help and also appreciating the assets that they do bring, but also, having honest conversations because a lot of our students from like the Valley don't get to leave the Valley often. And if they do, of what I recall, and even going back recently, it's maybe San Antonio, maybe Houston, maybe Dallas, right? And I think is, encouraging them to use those assets that they have to be able to explore outside of their comfort zone, and to, like I said earlier, to come back to be able to make more of an impact, but also being candid about there's things that we're going to encounter. When you're in the Valley, sometimes you don't think about discrimination and diversity, right? Because we're in that area. But also having those honest conversations that we might be the smartest one in the room. Because I remember, like I said, you were always very smart, one of the smartest ones in the rooms. Um, and, but we're going to encounter where faculty or others might see us as not having those assets, right? But to always make sure that they're learning, like you said, and bringing something with them so that they can continue to advocate for themselves, so that they can continue to highlight those assets and continue on their journey, even if we fail, and say, it's okay if you fail, right? Because we learned something. Um, but not everyone's going to acknowledge our assets because of how we look, right? And our backgrounds, depending where we're at. That's why I was asking, like, do you think you would have had a different experience as a student at UTRGV where faculty maybe who look like you and a classroom full of individuals like you, your assets would have been highlighted more compared to a school where we're actually the minority in the classes? And that's why I was asking that.
Jose, what do you think?
So you asked originally if you're a first gen student, what do I tell you? And I have this conversation often with students. I had one today, and Camille's talking about candid conversations. I tell students, I explain to them how the academy works. I talk to them about how the assumptions professors sometimes make of them, the assumptions they make of professors, and I say you're not going to have the opportunity to highlight your assets in all your classes. The conversations we have here are not happening across the university. But what I do tell students is once you have affirmed your assets and you have understood that this whole, because I tell them three things when I did it today because it was one of my first classes. I said I'm gonna tell you three things. These are gonna be the first three things you hear from me and the last three things you hear from me at the end of the semester, and they're not gonna change because I don't stop believing them. Number one, every single one of you deserves to be here because they were handing out admission slips. You have worked hard to be here, and you should be proud of that. And two, every single one of you has what it takes to earn an A in my class. I know that because I teach a class, and I know you have what it takes to earn A's across the institution. And three, you make the university a better place for being here because of the stories you bring with you and the stories you bring of your family. And I start with that, and I end every semester with that. And I think it's connected to having them own this, and I tell them this university was built for you. This building, these chairs, everything is here for you, and you have to feel like it's your university. And once students, I believe, once students understand that and buy into that and take charge and ownership and own their own assets and strengths, then I tell them this is what you have to do. You have to communicate with your faculty. You have to ask questions. Go to office hours. Look for seek out tutoring. Seek out the resources that you have. But I don't think students will be as likely to do that if we don't lead with everything they bring. If we remind them that the institution is theirs, I'm there because you're there, the students. If you're not here, there's no faculty to, there's no need to have faculty here. And so I share stories of my experiences at the University of Michigan when friends of mine, and myself, African Americans, myself, we used to walk around campus and we'd have to look twice, three times before we crossed the street. And students who were white would just walk, wouldn't even look because and people would honk the horn and they'd like flip them off. And I said part of it was that they felt like that was their university, like it was built for them, like they owned it in a sense. And I want my students to feel that way about this institution, that it's built for them. And I truly believe that when students understand that, I think they'll be much more inclined to ask questions, seek out the resources, and do the things that we know from the research are correlators with student success. So creating strong relationship with your peers, the faculty, and the institution has been proven to result in higher academic success. But I always use the assets and strengths and sense of belonging to lead into some of these things that the students, first generation students can do. And it's not easy. It's not easy as a first generation college student to go to an institution. Uh, and I think I've shared this story with you, Jose. That I took a class with a professor once, Professor Organsky, who was a world-renowned political scientist, wrote the War Ledger and multiple, books on, international conflict, and they even advised Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I was afraid of going to talk to the professor because we were reading six books and they were all his books, right? So I'm like, my goodness, what am I going to talk to this professor about? He was 70 something at the time, maybe older. But I walked in there and he was the nicest person in the world. Started telling me how he grew up in Italy and all these different things. Asked about my family. It's not easy to take that step, but I think it's much more likely that you'll take it if you understand that you deserve to be there, that you have what it takes, and that you make the university a better place.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's really powerful. I do want to get back, and yeah, I agree. I do want to get back to Camelia's point about maybe even unlearning some of the things, some of the habits, or um, and I love, and I apologize if you hear my dogs back there. I love I love my culture, and I think Camelia, I going back to some of your questions about leaving and things like that. I was one of those kids and who was ready to leave. I was a kid that felt like I need to get out, right? And and it's funny, but when I'm away, I develop this incredible love for Couch Elsa and for my community. And I look forward to coming back every summer, and I look forward to working. And I was a substitute teacher and really sort of rediscovering my home, right? So I love the culture, but to your point, and I had a conversation with students today. I was asking them, what is it that they're embarrassed to do? And they're embarrassed to ask questions in class. They're embarrassed to go to office hours. They're embarrassed to ask for help. And so how do we how do we teach them? How do we teach them to unlearn that? How do we teach them to step out of their comfort zone and embrace these things, right? And so, feel free to take a shot at that, or Jose, if you want to jump in. But I think this isn't something that's isolated. I mean, I've seen this consistently across all of my classrooms for as long as I've taught. I feel like it's much more prevalent, or it just seems like I just see it more now. Um, and so, how do we encourage our students? I think we talked about vulnerabilities, and I think certainly we can do that. But what other advice would you give our students to help them kind of unlearn a lot of that?
I think giving them examples too, right? Especially a lot of the times, students, and we all have been there, we come in thinking we know something and we don't need help, right? Because we are hard workers. Uh, but when you can get them wherever they are, whether they're in a classroom or you meet them at the dining hall, or you're just having a kind of conversation with a student while you're waiting for the bus, is just sharing some examples. I think for me, some of the things that I've done to help students look at things differently, motivate them, like I said, to get out of their comfort zone, is so when students, I've I've had the pleasure of working at different institutions, right? And the demographics are of students are different. And I don't mean the makeup, the race makeup. I mean the characteristics that they bring, the way that they think. So like when I worked at the University of Iowa, the students there were very, very appreciative of the support I gave them. You know, I came out in the newspaper every year as one, you know, included with other people who were like top, you know, people that were helping students. And then when I went to Georgia, you know, if I didn't respond to an email in 24 hours, they would contact the president. I wasn't very helpful. But when I went to UTRGV, the students there were, some of the students that I encountered were very high achieving students, had really amazing goals, and felt like there's nothing that I could teach them, right? So I'd have first year students, first generation, first year student coming in. They wanted to take 16, 18 credit hours. They have to help their families at home because a lot of the times that's what we do growing up in those areas. They have to work to help families at home, and they want to graduate in 4 years, right? And I think it's great. And I tell them, okay, what is your what do you plan to, why do you want to graduate early? Why, I want to get a job. That's amazing, you know. And then what do you think you're going to do? Well, I'm just going to work, right? I have to provide for my family. I said, okay, so I want you to answer me this. You're a first year student. You're really trying to do all of this, and I'm sure you can get there. But are you going to be a rock star with your mental health the same way that you're going to be a rock star in your classes? And I says, okay, you graduate early and you have to get a job. But guess what? Now you have to work 6 months to a year to get even a week of vacation, right? And right now you're in college where you have the opportunity to make decisions of how many classes you really want to take, what aligns with your current reality, so that you can learn skills that are going to be helpful inside and outside of the college. And so when we have those kind of conversations, then I have students come back and say, I'm taking the summer off. I only am going to take 12 credit hours. I'm going to do this. I'm like, yes, because right now you can do that. So I think sharing examples so that they can unlearn some of those things and not being judgmental, because we all have learned you work hard, you don't take a day off, you keep going, right? But I don't think that's healthy, a healthy approach in my opinion. And I think, like you said, a lot of us, I love, I mean, I had fun even though I made a lot of bad choices. I had fun in growing up. I loved the apartments I grew up in, right? La Magnolia, like I loved it, but I was ready to leave, right? I thought I would never come back to the valley. I felt like there's nothing there for me because every time I came back, it felt like not much had changed, whether it be a year later, 5 years, or 15 years later. When I applied at UTRGV, I wanted to help my sister. You know, so I said, if I get the job, I'm close. She has some family members. And then when I thought it was in Edinburgh. So then they told me it was in Brownsville. I had never lived in Brownsville. I knew of it, but I never went there. I would tell you that leaving the valley was one of the best decisions of my life. I felt like I have grown as an individual. I can make an impact on students, but coming back to the valley to share the knowledge that I have gained, to get a more admiration for the valley. I love Brownsville. Like I never thought I would love Brownsville, right? Because I didn't know about it. And making an impact for students who are have shown that there's a lot of things that are still similar from when I was a young student, a young person. And so I think for me is just helping them unpack what that means and how they're going to impact the next generation by unlearning some of these things and being okay with it and not feeling guilty. but having more than one conversation about it, right? Because at first, can you imagine you've worked your whole life, you're always making sure you never take a day off. It's going to be hard for you to do that. It's not just going to happen because you're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel like you should be doing something. You don't feel productive. So, extending grace while we are learning to unlearn these things and being judgmental. I feel like that's how I've been able to help students is sharing examples, but then sometimes understanding that sometimes we might not be able to take a step back from our reality. So, for example, say that I have a student that says, hey, I'm in a really tough position. I'm in a, say, for example, a dysfunctional marriage, and I really need to get out. So I don't have time to take an extra semester to graduate. Meeting the student where they're at to still make sure that they have support. So they might not be able to unlearn these things now or apply the things that they're unlearning, but they now have the idea for the next step, right? After college. So I think it's important to address every student with their own journey versus one thing fits all students. I think that's what has helped me to help students unlearn some of these things.
So personalizing it and also offering some perspective to, from your own experiences, but also helping them to maybe take a step back from their reality to look at maybe long term down the road, what is it that I want to accomplish? And at the rate that I'm going, or by with the habits or routines that I'm utilizing now, is that realistic for me? Maybe I need to take a step back and do some things differently.
Yeah, and also placing, I think it's great. Like if a student has a goal of a 4.0, I think it is great, right? But what are you sacrificing to get that 4.0? Is it because you're going to go to med school or because you think you need to have a 4.0 to look like the stellar student? And I tell students all the time, like, I think it's great. Let's get there. But if it's for this reason, let's look at something else, right? Also, I'm very honest with the students. I'm like, I've been working since the age of what, 12? No one has ever asked me about my GPA. They ask me how I handle stressful situations in college or other, experiences I've had. How did I manage my time? How did I do this? How was I a team player, a colleague? But no one has asked me about my GPA. So I'm not saying let's not get the 4.0, but let's find out why you need that 4.0. Let's put that together and then let's get there in a healthy, balanced way.
Thank you. Jose, you want to add anything?
Well, as I hear everybody speak, I'm thinking of two things. One is that my faculty approach, right? And how I encourage students to not be afraid of talking to faculty, is that in my class they get out of their comfort zone. They're forced to, and we do a lot of group. We did some today, and I go around and they met each other for the first time, and you start asking them how was this. It was awkward, sometimes it was awkward because we're not used to it, and but at the same time they met new people, and this is what they said as we started the class. One of their goals for the semester was to go out there, and they're most excited about college, about meeting new people. So this is how you get to meet new people. I said it was one exercise, one activity, and in 15 minutes, now you've met 6 people on campus that you can say hi to when you see them down the hall. And I ask students to present. Some of them don't feel comfortable, but they present anyway and they get through it. So as the faculty member in me says, if we expose them to enough of these opportunities to get out of their comfort zone and help them see the benefit of getting out of your comfort zone and the benefit that they receive from meeting people and becoming part of this larger community, then they will be more likely to leave my classroom and go and implement some of these things, approach faculty, approach their peers. One of the from last semester, one of the reflections that stands out to me, and I'll never forget, a student said, I had no idea how valuable my peers are to me and my education. But when we had all these conversations in class, I realized that they're a big asset that I need to tap into more. And so people start talking more. So my hope is, at least from the faculty member side, that if they engage in enough of these activities in my classroom that disrupts their ideas of, you know, what they should and shouldn't do, and their fears of talking to people, getting out of their comfort zone, seeking out a resource, that they'll be more likely to utilize that when they leave. Uh, but if there's a student that's never going to be enrolled in my class, you know, and is not going to meet me on campus and go through these experiences, I would tell them this. I would tell these students that, and it's based on, you know, the hundreds and, you know, of articles that I've read and studied for the dissertation, that the three of the most important relationships on campus is peer to peer, peer to your faculty, and peer with the institution, how well you're able to connect with all these resources on campus. And I share this with students in my class, but if you're a first generation college student, that's what I would highlight. Build relationships with your peers, build relationships with your faculty, build relationships with the institution. It will require that you step out of your comfort zone. But I would tell you that there are probably more people at the university that care and want to see you do well than what you've probably been told in high school, or, you know, leading up to the university. So I hope that you won't be afraid, and I would also tell them that um, it's okay to talk to your parents about what you're experiencing, whether they went to have a formal education or not. I tell students a story in my class. My parents went to the third, fourth grade in Mexico. They had no formal education. When I was going to the University of Michigan, I often lived with friends, right? And I've never been the person that puts their name on the milk and the eggs, and, you know, I'm like, whatever's in there, you know, whatever. My parents used to go up there to work when I was at the University of Michigan, and from time to time, they would come to the university, from drive 2.5 hours from they were working out in agriculture to see us. And my parents were, from time, they would come by and they would bring 2, 3 bags of groceries, right? And I remember telling my friends and the people I was living with, everything that's not in these 2 bags you can have, right? But these 2 to 3 bags are mine, and they're mine because my parents brought them and they sacrificed to get them to me, and I want to respect that. I never had anybody touch any of that stuff because they knew the work that my parents were doing was not easy work. And my parents would go and say, mira, mijo, te traemos esto ahí para que te ayude algo. Échale ganas. Right? And to me, that meant more than the president of the university could tell me in terms of encouragement. So I would tell first generation college, don't be afraid to talk to your parents. They might not understand what you're going through in calculus or in, you know, in philosophy, but they have a lot of knowledge that they can share with you, and they've lived a long time and much more than we have. And I know I relied on my parents for motivation, for support, whether that, you know, they couldn't help us financially, but that's not what I needed at that time. So don't be afraid as first generation college students to lean on your family for help. And sometimes that makes a world of a difference.
Awesome. Thank you. You know, and Jose, I was going to ask you all to give me some parting words, words of advice. I think you right on cue, you knew what to give us. Camelia, any parting words for our viewers out there?
And I agree with what he said, right? Don't be afraid to talk to your parents. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and be proud of what you do bring to the table, even though if it's different from other students. That's what makes us unique. And don't let other people's opinions of you bring you all the way down, right? It's okay to we're humans, we're gonna have feelings, but give yourself some time to process that and keep on going, and don't let anyone stop you, because there are going to be people who will give us some negative words and some negative comments. um, and I think depending on who you are, it could really damage students, or it could really motivate them to keep going, right? But I say just keep going and ask for help. Mhm.
Awesome. Well, thank you to both of you. Thank you for coming on here and joining us. Thank you for sharing your experiences. And really, I think what I appreciated most from both of you is grounding, right? You all grounded your advice in the work that you've done in the experiences that you've lived. And so I appreciate that. I hope that our viewers out there recognize that this is advice that's coming from, actual first generation graduates, but also practitioners, folks that are in the trenches that are working with students on the day to day. And I think the advice is incredibly practical, and I think can be very powerful for students. So I appreciate what you're offering. I also appreciate, I think, because I think I hope there were some administrators, some university administrators that watched this, because I think there is some really powerful advice for how, when we think about professional development and what faculty can learn, particularly faculty that aren't first gen, don't have that experience, what they can learn about how to approach and how to support our students, um, and as they make that transition. So I appreciate all of that, all of the perspectives. Thank you to all of our viewers out there. Thank you for joining us. We'll continue with these webinar series. Our next one will be on for high school students, actually, for the college application process and helping students work through that, because that in itself is a challenge. And so we want to be able to provide some information, some timely information and support for folks out there. Thank you to our panelists. This concludes today's webinar. And have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.